You've just cracked open your favorite RPG. You can feel the excitement building as you flip through the pages, smell the fresh printing and ink, gaze upon the evocative art. But what are you going to run? For some, choosing what campaign to run next can be as simple as selecting the system and module you're interested in. But if you're anything like me, modules might provide initial inspiration, but they hardly ever extend beyond that, a jumping off point. If reading through a nearly 300-page tome feels like cramming for a test rather than the excitement of running a new game, then you've come to the right place. Greetings, Goblins. We've covered a lot of grandiose topics on the channel so far, which is always fun to me, but I thought maybe we'd bring things a little more down to earth this time and talk about something a decent chunk of us deal with: choosing a campaign. First, I want to add a caveat here before we dig in. Make sure to like and subscribe so I can keep making videos like this one. I'm not totally against modules. In fact, I enjoy the occasional DCC-sized paperback module that usually spans anywhere from 10 to 30 pages, as opposed to the larger 300-plus page adventure books. They're just more digestible for someone like me with a kid, a wife, multiple jobs, and a Type B brain. And what's great is they're often easy to convert to almost any system, provided that system has things like HP, wizards, and of course goblins. So for this video, if you're not simply choosing a module, what should you run? Something to consider first when figuring out what kind of campaign you're going to run is to figure out what the playstyle is that you and your players are most interested in. Are you feeling a pulp action adventure? It might be time to finally run Savage Worlds. Seedy mystery with horror elements? Call of Cthulhu might be for you. A grim and perilous adventure game with tons of character options. Check out Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Once you have the game system decided, it's time to consider what kind of campaign do you want to run. Also, one thing I noticed when I switched away from epic tales and RPGs like D&D 5e and Pathfinder was that I'd grown very accustomed to the epic tiers of play. I would plan out these world-shattering events to eventually take place, but in a lot of lower tier kinds of games, the campaign just never rose to that scale. It's a small but important distinction I had to learn the hard way, so I just wanted to mention that before we go forward. If you're moving away from epic fantasy, remember to downsize and scale. One method for formulating a campaign idea that personally works for me is pulling from media that I'm excited about. Not only does the inspiration get my creative juices flowing, but it keeps me from getting burnout if I think it's an idea that my players and I will enjoy exploring. For instance, a while back I was really into the Amazon series The Expanse. The thing I enjoyed the most about it was the idea of these different factions vying for control over some arcane and mysterious resource, the proto-molecule. Each faction was so rich and full of character, with their own figureheads, histories, and motivations for what they did. It made me want to run a campaign with a few well-fleshed-out factions. So I came up with a pair of urban fantasy islands I called the Twin Isles. They both had bustling ports that were a connecting route for all the 16 kingdoms of the realm. And because of this, many factions were clashing for control of that island, each with motivations of their own. Sound familiar? The players were thrown in the middle, put into some situations where they would have to choose a side, and events were set in motion. Inspiration and imitation can be powerful tools for creating conflict within the setting of your game. Oftentimes, it only takes an initial spark or idea to get the characters moving, and before you know it, the campaign unfolds naturally at the table. Now, I didn't have to understand the greater narratives of The Expanse. I just thought about what each faction in my game was after. Then, as soon as the players got involved, the course of events shifted based on their interactions. I just picked one thing that I thought was really cool about the show, and the players did the rest. A natural enemy arose as a consequence of their actions, and an obvious conflict ensued. And you can pull from anything that excites you for this kind of campaign creation. It could be a book, video game, or even a historical event. Take what inspires you and think, how could I tweak this a little and form a conflict that I'm even more excited about than what's already there? Take inspiration from it, but run with it. Make it your own. Oftentimes, if you change just a few things, like I did with the setting and factions, it will be unrecognizable to your players. And you know what? Even if they do recognize it, then you can just gush over how cool that show was, and how much fun you thought it would be to get involved in a grand conflict like that. In fact, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, the founders of D&D, originally made the game because they wanted their friends to live in the worlds of Lord of the Rings and Conan and continue their own stories within those worlds. So borrowing from other stories is just carrying on one of the great traditions of the hobby. A lot of people get caught up in plotting out an entire campaign, but you can end up wasting time this way. Most of the time, the players will surprise you, and if you plan out too far, they may not even make the decisions you expected. These days, I have very little time to prep, and I like to finish a session by asking, so where do you guys think you're headed next? Or, what do y'all want to do after this? Just so I know what to prep for the next session. I rarely plan for more than 2 or 3 sessions out, unless it's something like a major dungeon crawl. I like to make the most of my limited prep time, so I only want to plan what's actually going to happen, the next thing the characters are going to interact with. I know not everyone out there is an improv-heavy creative type, but hopefully some of you find this process helpful. And for the ones that don't, there are plenty of videos reviewing different adventure modules that you can run. So, thanks for listening, and remember, make mistakes, choose chaos, and most importantly, have fun. I have scoured to the heart of the archives deep, and traveled to the top of the cinder cloud peaks, and forded the everplains for the answers I seek. So beware of the realms where you meddle, for the fates can be fickle when the dice settle.